and a warm welcome to everyone joining us here in Paris, as we can see with the wonderful backdrop behind us and some rain, which is absolutely fabulous. Now, as we know, Paris is one of the most densely populated cities in the world, and here we are today to shine a light on efforts to transform urban centres just like Paris into low-carbon, sustainable, resilient ecosystems. Because sooner or later, the overwhelming majority of us will live in cities. It's estimated 85% of the global population will live in a city by the end of this century, which means that if we have any chance of keeping temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees, we're going to have to decarbonise our very own backyard. What does that look like? Well, here's a hint: low carbon energy and transport, nature-based solutions and programs to reduce urban sprawl. But I'm not going to give you everything because we have some wonderful speakers lined up for this session. And to kick it off, I'm delighted to welcome explorer, environmentalist, and president of the Solar Impulse Foundation, Bertrand Piccard. Hello and welcome to you, Bertrand.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Good morning, everyone.
Now, let's be honest, the first thing that comes to mind when we hear the name Bertrand Piccard is an image of you in a solar-powered aircraft flying around the globe, and yet you've been invited here today to speak about on-the-ground solutions. Can you explain to us a little bit about your evolution in your environmental focus?
It's not an evolution, because I created Solar Impulse precisely to do what I'm doing now. Because when I initiated Solar Impulse, the clean technologies, the renewable energies, they were considered to be anecdotic. Nobody was taking that seriously. And I wanted to show that you can use clean technologies and renewable energies to do things that are considered to be impossible, like flying around the world with no fuel. And this was the leverage in order to be much more practical with the solutions. The plane was symbolic. But now what the Solar Impulse Foundation is doing is to identify everywhere in the world different types of solutions that can protect the environment, that exist today, so not vague ideas for the future, but it is profitable. It's profitable for the economy, it's profitable for the industry, it's profitable for the customer, and this is the most attractive way that you can create in order to push people to be environmental friendly. It's to tell them it will create jobs and make profit.
Because at the time it was a far-fetched idea, and what you're saying is today these ideas can be a reality.
Yeah. But you see, in a way, in order to be here, and I wanted to be here, I had to go around the world in a solar airplane because it attracted the awareness and it brought some credibility to the clean technologies.
Absolutely. Now, today we're here talking about low-carbon cities. It's easy to throw around these terms, and sometimes they lose their meaning the more we say them. What for you is a low-carbon city? What's your vision of that?
Well, a low-carbon city is a city that doesn't emit carbon. So the goal is quite easy. The way to do it is more difficult because people still believe that low carbon is something boring, threatening, sacrificial, expensive. And as long as you still have people who don't understand that ecology and economy go together, you have a lot of resistance. A lot of resistance. People in the head of the cities are saying, we should do it, but we don't know how to do it without having strikes and people going down in the street and saying it would be bad for our purchase power. But it's exactly the opposite. If you have a low-carbon city, it means that you are saving energy, you are saving natural resources, you are efficient, which means that the people who are the poorest are paying less because they waste less. Today, an example. We have the problem with the war in Ukraine with less gas and oil imported from Russia. What is the first reaction of the authorities? We have to get more gas and oil elsewhere. It's ridiculous. The first reaction should be, how can we save enough gas and oil in order not to need any more gas and oil from Russia? And when you know that 75% of the energy that is produced in the world is lost and wasted because of the inefficient and outdated systems that we use, it's very clear that we have to put all the emphasis on saving energy and resources, being more efficient. So in that sense, it's not only renewable energies that we need, it's also energy efficiency. And when we walk, we have two legs. When we deal about energy, there are two pillars. One is renewable energy, that means energy that are clean, renewable, and so on, and now they are more profitable even than fossil energies. And the other thing is energy saving, efficiency, so the amount of renewable energy will be enough. And if you decrease the consumption by half, then the amount of renewable energies needed will also be divided by half, and what we can produce will be enough. So this is the type of things that we really have to keep in mind. The first thing for decarbonized city, it's energy. But it's not only energy, and there are the constructions, the waste, and the construction also. We know it's about 20% of the CO2 emissions for the construction and 20% for living in the buildings. But this is until now. What we need is to change that with all the technologies that exist. So there are technologies that have been identified by the Solar Impulse Foundation around the world, labeled Solar Impulse Efficient Solution, and we are now making a guide for cities with all the solutions that apply for cities.
Absolutely. I wanted to touch on that guide because it's a guide for cities. It's not a list of places to go and visit and eat and drink. It's a concrete solutions-based guide. Can you tell us actually what makes up this guide? What's in it? What can we find?
You can find existing solutions. There is no wishful thinking. Because very often you hear people who say, oh yes, we have to do that. We have to do it like this. This is what we should obtain. But it's wishful thinking. They have no idea how they're going to do it. They don't have the toolbox. What we have is the toolbox, clearly. Startups or big corporations who are showing how to have zero-emitting cement, how to use the waste of the demolition to recycle them in the concrete of the next construction. You have platforms to exchange the waste. You have now new systems to use less concrete because the calculation of the forces in the buildings are better made, so you don't need as much material to do it. And yesterday I was at the table with the sustainability, the head of sustainability of Saint-Gobain, and things go really fast. When she was telling me, we did 10,000 big windows carbon neutral because they used biogas for that and recycled glass. Okay, this is practical and concrete. It just happens. But why doesn't it happen more? Is because the politicians, or let's say the civil society in general, is still accepting to have outdated legal frameworks. So it is allowed to pollute, it's allowed to waste, it's allowed to use bad materials and polluting materials and all type of energies. And this has to change. And the way to change it is to prove that because the technology allows to do better, the regulation can be much more demanding. If you can have zero-emitting cement, it is not normal to still tolerate highly emitting cement. You just have to go to the newest materials. And if we manage to have this, I would say, synergy between the industry and the politic, it can go very fast. But if one of the two is missing, it will never work, and we will continue to make speeches about what could happen in the future instead of saying what happens now. And what we really want to do with the Solar Impulse Foundation is to show what happens now.
You talk about one of the elements missing, perhaps, and earlier you touched on the fact that the reaction was to where else can we get our oil and gas if we can't get it from Russia. What you're saying is the political will is lacking. If businesses are open to it, is it the political will that's not there?
Until last month, I was saying yes, it's the political will that is lacking, and it was difficult to prove it. Because, okay, personal experience, meeting prime ministers, heads of state who tell me, oh, we do so much already. I'm saying, you don't do it enough at all. Oh, look what we're doing. But now it's not me who's saying it. It's the IPCC report. And I don't know if you've noticed that for the first time, the IPCC experts were courageous enough to speak about the obstacles. And what are the obstacles? Namely, lack of leadership, bad governance, administrative inertia. So they name it. And this really puts the target at the right place. So now what we have to do is to make an alliance with the politicians and say, look, you are not putting yourself at risk if you go on sustainability, because the solutions make you more profitable, create more jobs, support the economy, and it's not anymore about degrowth. It's about qualitative growth. When you create jobs and make money by replacing what is polluting by what is protecting the environment. And there are so many examples that we can give. One of the examples is in the waste management. I think Jonathan can put the slide about that. Today, it is possible to have 0 landfills, 0 pollution in the oceans, and 0 pollution anywhere. Why? Because you have technical solutions that collect all the waste and turn them into something else. So you have one solution. I was really pulling my hat when I saw that. One of the solutions that we labeled, they take all the waste from a city without even sorting them, and they turn them into construction stones.
Where is that happening? What city is that? Where is that happening?
That's a private company who is offering that. Now, obviously, they are not successful enough when you see how much landfills you still have. But you could shut down all the access to landfills and oblige everybody to use this system, transforming the waste into construction stones, into gravel. Another one is turning them into plastic furniture. Then, when you recycle, when you sort them, you recycle and you get new material. You do that for the glass, everybody knows it, but if you don't have the filière to collect the waste, it will not work. And you can do that, of course, with plastic bottles. You can recycle infinitely, perpetually, the PET bottles, and they remain transparent. And it's a business that works and that is profitable. But, but it's not yet used everywhere. And this is why an exhibition like ChangeNOW is so important. It's because it really puts to the face of everyone all the solutions that are existing and that we can use. But you know, it's exactly like if there is a really big sickness that is deadly, and there is an antibiotic for it, and nobody takes it. And here we have all the therapy, all the medication for our world that are everywhere in the field of energy, waste, construction, water, mobility, and we don't use it. I give you another example that really touches the fundamentals of health. There is a system for 500 to 600 euros that you install on the combustion engine of your diesel car, diesel or gasoline. It reduces by 80% the toxical particles emitted and by 20% the consumption. So because of the lower consumption, you pay for the investment of the module. So it's profitable for the user. Mm-hmm. You would not have any gilets jaunes because with this type of things, you pay your gasoline much lower because you don't use as much. But for public health, it's really important because for the quality of air in the city, it's 80% less pollution. But it's not mandatory to use it. So it's exactly like if we were having today cars with no catalyzer, with lead in the gasoline and things like that. Okay, the authorities made a good job for the catalyzer and the lead, but now they are not doing it well with the new systems just because they don't know about it. So if you install it on your car, you have no advantage. You could not be allowed, for example, to drive during a peak of pollution. So there is no incentive to do it, although you're not polluting.
I know that leaders don't like when I ask them this question, but does society need to be willing to make dare I say the word, sacrifices for this transition. Obviously, adding something to your car is not a sacrifice. You pay some money and you get it back by paying less at the pump. But overall, do we have to stop using our dryers? Do we have to stop imagining that we'll have a private individual car for the rest of our lives? Do we have to change some things?
Hair dryers, yes. No, if you tell to the people they have to make a sacrifice, they will hate you. And this is why there are so many people hating the ecologists, because for far too long the ecologists have said that we have to make sacrifice, reduce mobility, reduce comfort, reduce traveling, reduce everything. And it's not attractive. So I explained that as a psychiatrist. Before being an explorer, I'm a psychiatrist and psychotherapist. And I noticed that you need to speak the language of the people that you want to motivate. So the key decision makers today, you need to tell them about job creation and profitability for the economy, not degrowth. They won't do it. So this is actually the work of the foundation. It's precisely why all my team, and you have a lot of them in the ChangeNOW, you'll see them with a Solar Impulse jacket or shirt, and you can ask them all the questions you want. But they are working to identify solutions that allow to avoid sacrifice. So you tell to people, you're just going to make a better life, you're just going to be able to have access to new solutions instead of having to make a sacrifice. But nevertheless, I still believe that the green activists are doing a really good job, because by pushing the fear, by speaking about the problems, by striking, by demonstrating, they oblige the governments also to take action. And then we can come and say, look, if you want to take action, here are a lot of solutions that you can use. So there's a very good synergy between what we do and the green activists.
I wanted to just give you one example that happened this week here in Paris. The mayor of Paris put forward a plan to turn one of the lanes on the periphery, that's the circular road that goes around Paris, into a green belt of trees to green kind of the city and create it. It immediately faced pushback, partly from opposition parties, and it feels like a lot of these green measures are getting pushback no matter where they are in the world, which is stalling progress.
If you want to increase the traffic jams, have people blocked on the road with an engine turning without moving and putting more CO2 and particles in the atmosphere, if it's really your goal to do more pollution, you have to do it. You have to put a green belt on the periphery, of course. Now, if you want to do, but I spoke about that to Anne Hidalgo, and I like her for a lot of things, but we argued on this part. The voies de Seine, les berges de Seine, who are closed to cars, should be open for electric cars. Because you need an incentive. Do not punish the people who drive a normal car, but make an incentive for the one who have an electric car. And then when you are blocked in the traffic jam with your thermal engine car, you will see the electric cars on the voies de berge, au bord de Seine. You will see them on a special lane on the periph for them, like the carpool in America. And they will say, wow, we're going to buy an electric car, because we will avoid the traffic jams. And then
benefits rather than sacrifices.
Absolutely. And then you will have a big shift to electric cars. You know why it's impossible? And it's not my theory. I heard it from the elected people in France. It's not possible to do that because an electric car is a bit more expensive today than a thermal car, which means that only the rich people will escape from the traffic jam. And instead of having a part of the population escaping from the traffic jam and pollute less, we oblige everybody to pollute more and stay in the traffic jams. And this is absolutely ridiculous. So we have to use also the last leverage that is available is funding. Not subsidies, but funding. You know, there are trillions of dollars everywhere available for new investment. If you have more leasing possibilities for electric cars, electric buses, heat pumps, renovation of buildings, all these things, you would have all the poorest people have access to a better quality of life, have access to lower emitting houses, more comfortable buildings, and things like that. So, of course, you should avoid that the poorest people remain with the dirtiest cars, but you have to put in place the funding for all the people who need their car to go at work in the morning, who need that, all the people who demonstrated as Gilets jaunes, we have to help them with funding, with leasing, in order for them to be able to use the special carpool lane on the Périph' for electric cars, on the Bord de Seine, and so on. So it's a question of policy, it's a question of being systemic. If you just take one angle each time, you fail everything. But if you look and find that there is a connection between all of them, then you have a systemic approach and you succeed in everything. And this is what we need. And this is why I love these type of speeches. I just regret, because normally Anne Hidalgo was supposed to also be here, but she had to leave at 10 o'clock. And she could have
defended her.
She could have defended or even attacked me. We like to argue together. But nevertheless, I think we really have to understand the truth that sometimes politicians are a bit afraid to tell, because they are on the left, they're on the right, they have their electors to protect. I'm not in a party, so I can say really what I think. And thank you for allowing me to do it.
I want to thank you, Bertrand Piccard, for joining us for this fireside chat. Thank you very much for your input. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, as we just heard, cities offer some of the best opportunities for decarbonisation, but more than that, they offer some of the best opportunities for high-impact investment. And a growing number of venture capital firms have seen the light to talk about investing in urban tech and how it may permanently change the way cities are designed, constructed and powered. I'm pleased to welcome our next two guests. Nicole LeBlanc, partner at 2150, a venture capital firm that focuses on the built environment, and also Krieg Dosier, CEO at Biomason, a company that has developed a way of growing concrete using bacteria. Hello and welcome to you both. Before we get into the nitty-gritty ginger of how you actually go about growing concrete, I'm going to turn to Nicole first to get a better feel for why 2150 has decided to focus specifically on urban tech.
We're really excited about cities, and as many of you know, cities are wonderful places to live. Probably a lot of you live in cities. Cities are responsible for 80% of GDP, but also 70% of emissions, 70% of electricity usage. And so cities are a really important place in order to really affect change. And so for us, we're really looking to invest in technologies that just make cities better places to live, make them easier, more sustainable, more healthy, more livable. And what I'm really excited about is the intersection of different verticals. So it's not just mobility, it's not just construction, it's not just prop tech, it's where these things come together. And so how does energy work with mobility or the built environment? And so really interesting disruptive change can happen at the intersection of these
rather
verticals.
Than seeing them in a silo. On your website, you say you're hunting for gigacorn. Can you explain what we mean? We kind of feel like we know what you mean, and then I was like, maybe it's worth explaining.
Yes, and so we did that because we really want to keep the momentum going, thinking about climate tech. And so for us, everybody, typically knows what a tech unicorn is. That is, a technology company that has $1 billion valuation. So we are looking for those, but ones that mitigate a gigaton of CO2. So really looking for companies that have this dual purpose.
And so what was it about Biomason that really attracted you to this partnership you've invested in the project? I read that it was almost a case of you seeking out them rather than the other way around.
So how we look at the world is we start with the problem. And so we have a number of investors in our fund who are real estate developers, construction companies, and property managers. And we're working really closely with them to understand the problems that they're facing. And then we go and do our own research. So we started with cement because cement and concrete is responsible for 8% of emissions alone. And so we were really, really excited to dig into this space to really see where there could be cool technologies that would be disrupting that and really trying to lower emissions. And as we we kind of went on that process, really looking up and down the value chain to see where are there opportunities, for disruption that a venture capital fund can actually, have an effect, because some solutions are very capital intensive, and a small fund, 270 million euros, but small, kind of in the larger finance sector, can have an impact. And so biocement was an area that we got really, really excited about. And when we saw Ginger and the company and what they were doing, we really just had to get involved.
Now you touched on, on the level of emissions. I mean, when I read this, concrete is, after water, the most used material on Earth. I mean, I don't think anyone in this room probably would have naturally thought of that. Ginger, I wanted you to explain a little bit about what road led you to cement.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is in architecture. So I was trained to select materials for the built environment. And for me, I felt that was a giant responsibility, because I felt it was my role to understand how they were made. So when I started to look into how precisely cement is made, Portland cement, that's when I started to figure out, oh, okay, we're mining limestone and then burning it at high temperatures so that we can create a cementitious material. And that stuck with me in terms of, how could we make this better? So my approach to solving this was really looking at nature, looking at how natural cement formations are made underwater, how natural cave systems are made. So from an architectural approach, I did not know too much about geology and microbiology, so I started with just one question: what if you could grow cement similar to how nature grows cement? And then dove into microbiology and precisely understood that all of these systems around us, I mean, if you think about the beautiful coral reefs that are in the ocean, they're just taking the material from their environment. And it's really microorganisms that are responsible for building that calcium carbonate. So that's where we started. It was in a second bedroom, which was really fun at the time. But yeah, that led to an approach of curiosity and discovery.
Now, I believe you have a video that explains a bit about the Biomason vision. Let's take a look at it now.
Our instinct is to build, to make a shelter for all of us, to bring us water and harness its power, to connect us when it matters most. And for thousands of years, we've been using concrete to advance the world. Concrete is the second most consumed substance on Earth after water. But building our world came with a cost we weren't counting on. For 200 years, we've relied on Portland cement to bind concrete together. Creating this cement requires burning limestone at extreme temperatures to get calcium, a process that releases carbon dioxide as a byproduct. If the cement industry was a country, it would be the third largest carbon emitter, surpassed only by China in the US. But carbon is not the enemy. For millions of years, nature has used carbon as a building block. We at Biomason have learned to emulate its blueprint, becoming the only company in the world using biology to produce cement. Our biocement technology employs natural microorganisms, creating controlled, structural cement in ambient temperatures without emitting CO2. Imagine switching off the world's kilns, reducing 25% of global CO2 emissions from the concrete industry by 2030. With a growing legion of patents and international strategic partnerships, our biocement technology is the proven way to build better. Join us in leading the global transition to planet-friendly construction.
I'm afraid you don't have one of those bricks here with you, do you, today?
One on the chair right over there.
Oh, you do? Well, we'll get someone to bring it up for us in a moment. Tell us more about the cement, though. How does it work, and why is it more sustainable?
Yeah, absolutely. So we start with microorganisms, and what's interesting is that only 1/1000th of 1% of microorganisms have been discovered. And they're amazing. They can do so many actions. They're little chemical factories. I mean, you can find extremophiles all around our planet. Unfortunately, their biodiversity is also at threat. And given the right amount of nutrients and the right amount of calcium and carbon sources, they can create biocement. So our cave systems do this, our natural marine structures do this already. So what we do is we take microorganisms. We have a foundry that has over 8,000 different strains from around the world. And we take those organisms and put them into aggregate, and they just use limestone to take the calcium and the carbon away and then reform it. It sounds simple, but if you think about limestone, limestone is around 10% of the Earth's crust. We have a lot of limestone or calcium carbonate underneath our Earth's crust. It's the most abundant material. It makes sense why 194-year-old technology, Portland cement, is as ubiquitous as it is. But in our opinion, ubiquity is a problem. You know, if we want to be ubiquitous, we really have to think about what are our supply chains going to look like 25 years from now, 50 years from now, 200 years from now. So that's been our approach of, you know, looking at scale and looking at with 2150, you know, that gigacorn type status, like to take out 25% of CO2 from concrete by 2030 is a highly aggressive goal. And we're up for the challenge because we truly firmly believe that biology is the answer for this. Because biology only requires the energy sources for its metabolism, and then you give it this Earth's abundant material, this calcium carbonate, and they can take it and reform it and put it back together. So, you know, just to I guess, go through some of the implications of this, trying to not be disruptive to every aspect of the process. So we still use the same equipment that you use in traditional concrete manufacturing. You know, it still has, you know, performance characteristics that are actually better than Portland cement-based concrete. So, you know, the list goes on, but the idea is to not disrupt everything, but rather replace this gray powder with a lighter gray powder in here.
And so in terms of being more sustainable, you're getting rid of the heating and, I mean, how much reduction in kind of, you know, the footprint is it compared to?
That's right, it's greater than 90%. And the remaining carbon that we do have in the system is coming from the nutrients that are required to feed. But yeah, you know, from our perspective, the approach is why burn limestone in the first place? Limestone is used to make Portland cement today. They take it, they burn it. All this CO2 gets lifted out, and a lot of CO2 is lifted up because of the energy required. I understand that, you know, there are benefits of capturing carbon. I think it's ridiculous to think that we could capture all of the carbon from Portland cement production today and put it back into concrete. To me, it's nonsensical. For us, it's let's cure the disease rather than treating the symptoms.
Nicole, in terms of, you know, curing the disease, how are you going over and beyond in terms of connecting the dots? How are you helping Biomason, for example, work with your investor base of real estate developers and construction companies, for example?
So we have, as I mentioned earlier, a number of real estate developers, construction companies, property managers, and they really want to do things differently. So a lot of them over the last few years have developed paths to net zero within their own companies, and how are they going to build differently? How are they going to build better? And so one of the reasons that they're working with us is to find companies like Biomason, because there's two things. So if you're in that industry, you either get tons of LinkedIn requests all day long, or people trying to reach out to you, and you don't even know, is this good, is this bad?
Yeah,
I have no idea how.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, you don't even know how to assess it, or you're completely disconnected from it because you're too busy actually trying to do your day job and build things, and you just don't have access to these technologies. And so that's what we're trying to do, is be the filter and work with companies and people like Ginger, and then bring those to our investors. And so Ginger and her team are working with a number of our investors. They're talking to the heads of construction, the heads of sustainability. And what's really interesting is you can't just make these introductions, because some of the amazing things that Ginger's doing, some of it, there's still some R&D that needs to be done. And so being able to get that feedback directly from the customer in a very direct and transparent way, and then our investors who are in the real estate industry, realizing that, okay, they're not exactly where we need them to be now, but in 6 months they will be, or in 9 months they will be, because things in the tech industry just move so fast. And so a lot of times they would just look at a technology and they would say, oh, that's not ready, and then they wouldn't need to look at it again. But the company would come back a year later and be a completely different company and have moved so fast and done all of these great things. And so really helping to kind of be that middle person to be able to help communicate that and really make sure that the two paths can align.
Now, Ginger, you're based in the US, but you're expanding into Europe. Can you tell us a bit about some of the partnerships that you're working on right now?
That's correct. So as Nicole mentioned, there are a lot of companies that have these very, very aggressive timelines to decarbonize. So one in particular is H&M. So we established a partnership with them last year. Their aggressive goals are starting with tile and concrete materials beyond just their entire fashion lines.
So you're talking about their building, their structures, their retail stores.
That's right. They have 5,000 stores across the globe. They do quite a bit of renovations. They do quite a bit of new builds. So for them, there's an aggressive goal to figure out how to decarbonize something as simple as the flooring in their stores. So we partnered with them last year. We've been developing products for them, very, very thin tiles. Those products will be produced in Europe. So we formed a partnership with a manufacturing partner in Europe, which is very, very exciting. And the building is complete. The equipment moves in later in the summer, and it opens in Q3 of this year. And so that plant will actually be producing the tile material, which we do have commercially available, but they'll be producing it at higher volume, as well as they have over 600 SKUs of concrete products. And for us, we're application agnostic. I mean, to take out 25% of CO2 from concrete means we have to be agnostic to the application. So it's really about that market-based and demand. And we have found quite a bit of demand in Scandinavia. So not only the H&M group, but also many different developers and groups. And I know, Nicole, we've talked a lot about that too, because you have stronger mandates, but also just stronger interest in terms of decarbonization and being able to have these proof points. So we have demonstration projects already in Scandinavia, which really helps to lift this up, prove that it is real. We have, of course, all the material testing that's required and different certifications on that.
Today, it's cement bricks, which if anyone wants to look at can touch it. It's got the same structural properties. It's as strong. It's got all the characteristics. But what might tomorrow bring? Is there a next step?
Yeah, absolutely. This is very exciting. So if you take the concrete market and you break it down, 15% is precast, so that's where you would have your pavers or your concrete blocks, tiles, et cetera. And then the remaining 85% is ready mix. So being able to have this in a concrete truck, being able to cast on site, all of the sidewalks that we see, lovely out here leading to the Eiffel Tower. That's really where you will see the massive impact. So for us, we recognize that, and we're pushing the technology to be able to be used in a ready-mix environment. And through these partnerships and introductions that Nicole is talking about, this is very, very helpful for us because it gives us a chance to work even earlier with customers and also go through different regulatory paths with them. I mean, if you think about it, this is something that just strikes me. One is that in the past 18 months, there has just never been more demand for decarbonized cement. The world is waking up. Look how fast we were able to get a vaccine out on the planet. These are hurdles that we have to get around in terms of being able to have these proof points, being able to show rapid testing so that we can get more and more into the market faster for all these decarbonized solutions, which I know we heard a lot about earlier in this panel session too.
You talk about kind of how recent and how fast things are moving. Nicole, more than ever, investors seem to be pouring money into startups that want to build a greener economy. What are you sensing, within your industry, that this trend is almost a competition between who can find and catch the next ride, to a greener economy?
So it's really interesting. I've been in VC for almost 15 years, and so maybe about 15 years ago there was Clean Tech 1.0, and things were really capital intensive, and the factors, like all the pieces of the puzzle just weren't really together yet, and some really interesting things came out, but profitability wasn't there. And what we have now we have digital innovation, physical innovation, and policy innovation is all coming together. So the stakeholders are all there. So, entrepreneurs, like Ginger are here, people from municipalities are here, and corporates are here. And so everybody's really trying to work together because we really don't have a choice anymore. And so it's really exciting to see that these groups are coming together. And 2150, we're based in London and Copenhagen. And one of the reasons we're in Copenhagen is because, as Ginger was saying earlier, there's this real willingness, from that policy perspective, from, the pension funds, from some of the institutional capital, and it's really driving these changes. And so it's very, very exciting. At 2150, we have a number of investors. We have a number of, in our fund, we have a number of co-investors, so other great funds, globally, both in Asia, the US, Canada, and Europe, and it's really exciting to see how things are coming together. And although there are some, kind of economic factors that are, kind of facing all of us today, things are slowing down a bit in our sector, but not nearly at the speed that they are in others. And so, we're really hopeful that even though there might be some things happening over the next kind of 12 to 18 months in the economy, that the climate sector will continue the momentum, because we really just have to, and all of the players are at the table, and everybody's really, really working hard to make it happen.
And just a final question. Obviously, 21 focuses on startups that make cities more resilient, but what other kind of projects are you working? That's kind of in construction. What are the other ones? Have you got to give us a taste of some of the other projects?
Yes, so we've made 11 investments to date in both hardware and software. So we have 2 cement companies, which is great because we really feel, and they're not competitive, so we look at the whole value chain, and we look at where there's opportunity, to have, impact. And so we have 2 cement companies. We have a number of software optimization to really make construction sites better. It's not public yet, I don't think, but we've invested in a biodiversity company, so stay tuned. That one's coming out in the next week or so.
A biodiversity company.
A biodiversity
That's interesting,
company.
because biodiversity is one of the ones that, you talk about profit. It's one of the really tricky ones. How do you, make money on biodiversity?
Well, this woman has figured out how to do that. So stay tuned, that's coming soon. And yeah, we've invested in some electrification companies, and we have what we call the urban stack. So if you think about a city, it's in different layers. So you have, infrastructure, which is enabling digital and physical infrastructure that enables, sort of a city to be able to be flexible over time, to then implement new technologies that you have to build, then you have to operate, and then you and I walking around, this experience that we have in the city. So we really see how all of these different layers of a city are interconnected, and we're really looking to invest up and down this urban stack so that the companies in our portfolio can not only work with our investors, but they can kind of feed off each other, and really, we're trying to kind of like draw this connect the dots sort of picture so that we can really find these gigacorns, and our portfolio alone can hopefully have a meaningful impact in reducing emissions.
I want to thank both of you, Nicole, LeBlanc and Ginger Krieg Dosier. Perhaps one day we can imagine biocement leading us to the Eiffel Tower. That can be a dream. Thank you very much, ladies, for your input there. I'd like to move now to our final segment of this session, because the truth is that low carbon transformation of our cities can't happen without major corporations on board, and more specifically partnerships between these corporations and the public sector. Now, to help guide us through this final panel, it's my pleasure to welcome Benoit Bazin, CEO of Saint-Gobain. That's French multinational and a global leader in the construction industry. Also, Arnaud Leroy, President of ADEME, that's the French government's ecological transition agency, and also Marieke van Doorninck, Deputy Mayor of the City of Amsterdam. Now, welcome to you all. I'm going to focus this particular part of our session on buildings for a large part. Why? Because the built environment generates nearly 40% of global energy-related CO2 emissions. We heard Bertrand say it earlier. And of course, most of our buildings are in cities. So Benoit, for you, what do our buildings look like in a decarbonised future? And how do we get there?
You need to think first on new construction and renovation. I'm sure we'll come back to that, because in Paris it's more renovation than new construction. You can think first to move towards light construction. When you move to timber frame, you get away from concrete blocks, you get away from full walls, but you have concrete, timber frame, you have a steel frame. You can move to light construction, and you save 50% of the weight of the materials, and therefore 50% of the CO2. So that's one way, more on the new construction. You should think of energy efficiency of buildings, and we know, Bertrand, Piccard said it, we know how to make a passive house in terms of energy, so the solution does exist. Third, you need to think on how to aggregate the full value chain, because the trick in construction is not to find a solution, it does exist, whether it's new materials or whether it's passive house, is how to organize a very fragmented value chain, pretty conservative on all the actors. You have to think also of circular economy. We have announced this week, indeed, the first worldwide production of zero carbon glass. Okay. With reused materials from glass, with biogas. So you need to think of circular economy. Next year in France, all the producers are going to be asked to take the demolition waste. In France alone, we have 160 collection points of waste so that we can take back the materials and feed them into our own manufacturing. Our glass wool insulation, it's 54% in France today of recycled materials. So you have to think of the cities of tomorrow with much more reused materials. So it's a combination of light construction, when you think of new, energy efficiency in renovation, circular economy, to reuse waste and materials, a lot of training of the end users. It is possible to do it, of the craftsmen on how to organize it. We train 100,000 craftsmen in France every year about energy efficiency standards. And after that, you can think of the modern construction. It's true for private buildings. It's true for public buildings, hospitals, schools. You have to think about new standards, new regulations to push not only the private buildings, but also the public buildings in large cities. And I think you have to think about how to make a city attractive. For a manufacturing company, it's fascinating times because you have to think of new materials, startups, a lot of new technologies and innovation. So it's a chance, to some extent, the climate change. It's a change, it's urgency, but also a chance to take the lead on new technologies. And it's a chance for a mayor to make it more attractive as a city, to welcome people in an eco-environmental friendly suburb. So there are many, many initiatives which are going on.
Thank you. Now, just talking about like European cities that, that have got buildings built over various timeframes in history, that makes that decarbonisation job a little trickier, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, because you need solutions for different neighborhoods, especially in the built environment. When we're talking about new neighborhoods, of course, we set the highest standards and we actually challenge the companies to not to compete over money, so who builds in the most efficient financial way, but actually who can build in the most sustainable way. And we have both demands on circularity, on energy neutrality, etc. And we also notice that a lot of builders really become competitive on sustainability, much more on other things, and they really put on high standards even by themselves, even before we ask them, because they know they will win if they put that in. So in the new environment, I think we have all these solutions that will really help us, and as a city I really feel that we have the obligation to put those regulations really on a high level to make sure that companies do the best they can and use the best materials they have. The problem is, how do we actually renovate our own buildings, our city buildings, but especially the buildings of people in poorer neighborhoods, in poorer houses? How can we make sure that, for one thing, now that the gas prices are going sky high, that they don't come into this fall of energy poverty, which a lot of people come in? So how can we take them first to renovate their houses, to insulate their houses, and at the same time see if we can start with collective heating systems, because those are the people who can't afford a heating pump. Even if we put in a loan, they still can't afford it. So what kind of collective measures can we take in order to do that? And at the same time, see how we can do that together with the people who are living there, because otherwise it becomes this large operation that is kind of opposed on people instead of something that you do together as a neighborhood. So for example, if we go into neighborhoods to start this collective heating system, which causes a lot of nuisance because all the streets will be open and there will be a lot of work, how can we combine that, for example, with greening the neighborhood and see if we build it back, that there's more trees, that there's more playing grounds? So we're looking at ways how we can actually make this a win-win for neighborhoods to really make that change. And my biggest fear is, because when I started working in these neighborhoods together with social housing companies on central or city heating based on wastewater from industries, a lot of people were saying, why do you start with the poor neighborhoods? Why don't you punish the rich people? Because it felt like a punishment to insulate those houses. It felt as a punishment to actually put on other ways to heat the houses on natural gas. And 3 years later, now that we have these high gas prices, it's completely the other way around. And we're actually supporting poor neighborhoods by putting this heating in. It is still a major challenge. As you were saying, all these different types of housing need other ways of insulating, need other ways of putting on other heat systems. And I think the main responsibility for a city government is make sure people who can't afford it to do themselves, to support them. And at the same time, also challenge those who can't afford it to actually make those changes, especially when you're looking at insulating houses. It is already something that is profitable within, I think, 5 years if you insulate your house. So the reason why a lot of people don't do it is because it's a lot of hassle. So one of the things that we're doing is actually have collective actions in a street and say, okay, if we have at least 5 families who work with us, then we do it together. And that is the thing that keeps people going, and then they start doing it. I think Corona times was a big way for people to insulate houses. You know why? They started up to renovate their house anyway because there was little they could do. And they started up cleaning up their attics. And actually at the same time, it was so easy then to insulate the roofs. So sometimes it's the small things that you can do to actually make that change and help support people to do the things that are already profitable.
I want to turn to Arnaud now. ADEME has envisaged 4 scenarios of how to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, which of course has implications for cities. Do we need to make some difficult decisions right now on exactly where we want to be and how we're going to get there? Are there some difficult decisions that may lead us on different pathways?
Good morning to all. Yes, because the carbon neutrality, it's not only low carbon economy, it's carbon neutrality. So yes. The step is really huge. I mean, if you look at the French citizen, a medium carbon footprint for French is around 10 tons a year, and we need to go to around 2. So you see the change. And we want to keep the same level of comfort as Bertrand explained. If you said, okay, it will be a global punishment, you won't go nowhere. But still, we have to be honest with the people. I think that we will have to make efforts. We'll have to change the way we move, for example, the way we live, the way we maybe end up new construction to go to the renovation, to have a really huge renovation wave, not only for private housing, but also for public, because the carbon price of a building is really huge when you build a new one. So it's something that needs to be discussed with the companies because they will have to change their business model as well. So the path to the carbon neutrality is not easy. It's possible, but we will have to change a number of our daily lifestyle.
Now, I wanted to actually play a quick game, a true or false. I'm going to throw out kind of some ideas that are widely thought about, and you need to tell me whether you believe it's true or false. First one, in decarbonised cities, we need to accept living in smaller spaces. I mean, fewer square metres per habitant. True or false?
False.
True.
True.
I'll keep going and we'll come back to, in decarbonised cities, we need to accept living in tall towers. We'll start with Arnaud.
But this, I mean, France is an interesting topic. Either you push for so-called metropolization, and in this case, you will need a skyscraper or tower, or you can balance as well the planning of your territory, but you need a bigger territory maybe than Netherlands. In France, we have a number of medium-sized cities which are sometimes losing population, and today, because of the IT, because of the fact that people are working, out of the office for a number of days per week, we believe that we may see a reborn of this type of cities. So we will see. In this case, we may not need to build, compact housing, because people, they have to accept it. So if you go for tower, you need to bring as well nature, biodiversity, stuff that will make life easier. I think people are not, especially after the COVID, they are not keen to be really enclosed in a really small flats without any external areas, shared areas. So it's something to be really discussed. And if you don't discuss it, you will have a rejection of it.
For instance, if I take France, it varies a lot by country. I think even whether it's smaller or bigger. In France today, we all know that we are extremely centralized in Paris, which is a beautiful city. But we see that a lot of the secondary cities were pretty small and not growing. It's changing. With the COVID, you can work from home 2 days, 3 days, work in Orléans, work in a second-tier city, have a bigger space, so better quality of life, enjoy biodiversity in your countryside. So, there is also a move back to single-family home, particularly in France. You see that also in the US. So it varies. I think we cannot generalize. We are in 75 countries, and we need to adapt to all the different countries. Make it affordable in emerging markets. I can tell you, for instance, in India, they are already working on sustainable construction. We use biomass to fuel in India with rice waste the energy of our plants. It doesn't exist in France because it's not organized. So I think we should not generalize because we have to adapt. Whether Paris is a different story. Yes, you are not going to scrap Paris and build it new. You have to renovate. But in other parts of the world, you have to think new. And I think we should not come back to the sacrifice of Bertrand mentioned, because if you have to say, in order to be carbon neutral, you need to move from 80 square meters in Paris to 50 square meters in an apartment, it's not going to fly. So I think we have to educate the homeowners, we have to train, and we have to make it efficient, cost-effective, with new standards. I think what we are lacking is standards. For a manufacturing company like Saint-Gobain, we know that we can scale and then reuse the cost when there is a good roadmap and there is a good endpoint. If we are asked to make double glazing with zero carbon glass, today it's 20% more expensive, but we know how to do it. So it's exactly what we like. When you define very well the endpoint, you scale it, and therefore manufacturing companies, contracting companies, it's exactly what you mentioned on renovation. If we do it one by one, it's going to be costly, but you could stay. I take all the streets, the buildings are the same. I standardize a bit the way it's going to be renovated. I have only one delivery on the job site per day versus 10 trucks for the next 5 years every day. And then I organize it much better. So I think it's a matter of organizing the value chain in order to scale the benefits, lower the impact in terms of footprint, and find the right solution.
I think I have maybe a bit different opinion, because I do believe that cities are more sustainable. And I still believe that you can have different kinds of living environments within a city if you're not only looking at the boundaries of the city, but in a region. In Amsterdam, we're working in a metropolitan region of Amsterdam, where Amsterdam indeed is the big city, and we have all smaller cities around it. One thing that we promised each other is that we won't grow out of our own boundaries. So we keep that green between the cities. So we will have density in the different cities that are within the metropolitan region, but they all have their own characteristics. They all have their own living environments. Some of are more relaxed, some are more dense, like Amsterdam. But at least all of those cities have enough people living there to have all your services that you need. So you need less mobility in between the cities. So you would have entertainment in your city. You would have your medical, your hospitals, your swimming pools, because it's not only, we're not only in our cars because of our jobs. We're also in our cars because we want to go to the theater. We are in our cars. So if you make sure that people have within their living surroundings, all these services, you can keep the space between the different cities green for biodiversity, for ecological regeneration, but also for recreation. At the same time, I believe in the city of Amsterdam, where we choose for the metropolization, where we choose also to have higher buildings, we also make sure that the public space indeed is very green and is very attractive for people to live in, and also creates a lot. That means then we have to say goodbye to cars, because you can't do it all. I don't believe in the idea that you can do it all. So we have to say goodbye to cars within the city, and we can, because everything is in walking or biking distance. So I do believe, yeah, there's a variety, but as a big city, I think a sustainable big city is a dense city, and the only sacrifice we need to make is to get rid of cars, at least in the public space.
I was going to just turn to Benoit for a moment to talk about some of the technological advances that are happening in buildings. You talked about the zero carbon glass. Are there what other kind of advances are you embracing in the future in terms of tech solutions?
We do also net zero carbon plasterboard. In Norway, we are building and extending a large plant where we go to hydropower electricity, 100% recycled gypsum, and it will make 100% zero carbon plasterboard. So it's not only glass, but you can do that with many, many materials. So it's a lot of reformulation of the products. We badly need green energy. So today, one of the topics in Europe is getting access to green energy. There is a truly lack of investment on green energy. We need energy for a lot of materials. So that's extremely important to go to green energy, biogas, green hydrogen, etc. If we were to use just the green hydrogen available in Europe today, we would run just one glass plant for 2 months. We have 13 glass plants in Europe. So we need reformulation of the materials, green energy, a lot of recycled materials. So we are working on many aspects to recycle glass, recycle glass wool, recycle gypsum, recycle concrete.
And these are profitable?
And they are absolutely profitable, yes. We are also working on enablers. You can add additives in cement, in concrete, keep the same end properties in terms of mechanical performance, but then substitute clinker in the Portland cement to fly ash, to slag. We use also raw earth. You excavate the earth from your garden, and you can make walls with raw earth within timber frame. So there are a lot of new materials. There are a lot of reformulation of the materials. If I take double glazing in France, it's 2 times 4 millimeters. In the US, the standard is 2 times 3 millimeters. So just move the standard in terms of lowering the weight of materials. So there are many, many initiatives. Again, the solutions technically, they do exist. In the construction market, the trick is truly to convince the cities, the architects, the homeowners, the contractors, the manufacturers, the builders, to organize themselves, to work together. Because if you work together upfront, you can lower the cost. And Amsterdam, I remember they asked us to deliver 1 truck per day, not 10, with a small truck, because you have to go in slalom around the cyclist in Amsterdam on the small bridges. But it's a standard in Amsterdam. If you want to deliver, you have a small truck, not too heavy to kill the bridges in Amsterdam, the beautiful bridges. So we need standards, but it works, and we need to act all together in terms of planning, using, of course, digital, because when you think of the construction of tomorrow, or even today, it's a bank of materials. So we have been working on life cycle analysis. We have 1,500 what we call EPD, environmental product declaration, within the families of products of Saint-Gobain, so that we can provide a builder, an architect, a city with a full life cycle analysis of the product. So there are many, many initiatives. Sometimes I have the impression to be the head of a startup. There are so many good ideas and excitement from the teams. We have been using within Saint-Gobain CO2 price for our CapEx investment and our R&D projects since 2016. So for the last 6 years, we put a carbon price each time we make a new plant, each time we work on new materials, because if you put a carbon price on existing materials, maybe it's more cost competitive to move to other decarbonated materials. So we have been using that, and it works. We have, just to finish on that, we have reduced by 50% the amount of CO2 we emit for the same euro of profit over the last 4 years. So you can be profitable, you can be growing, while reducing a big way, minus 50%, the CO2 of a large corporation like Saint-Gobain, 50 billion euros around the world in 75 countries. So many initiatives, but a lot more going on in the next years.
Absolutely. But Arnaud, do you agree with this, that the standards are really the key? The solutions are here. So what needs to happen now to accelerate it?
It has been said, the investment. So we are working together with Saint-Gobain as well. We subsidize certain moves in their producing process. So the standards are there. I think you have to discuss with everyone, the insurers, because especially in buildings, you've got norms, and you have to be sure that sometimes new materials meet certain criteria for fire and resistance, drying, because we've got the issue now in a number of regions. So the adaptation, we are always speaking about attenuation or mitigation. Now it's adaptation. A number of cities need to adapt. So the change in buildings, we'll have to take this into consideration as well. That's the way we work. We plan, we discuss, we try to, the state asks us to work together with the big companies, big firms, startups, so we finance, and we discuss the standards as well.
Do you have anything to add? Did you want to add to that?
Maybe one of the things that you came up with, because I really believe that one of the things that we need to do, we're talking a lot about tech innovation, and I do believe in tech innovation. Tech innovation can help us a lot, but I do think we need innovations on other parts too, and I think cooperation is one of them. We are in a world where cooperation actually means competition and the best wins. And I think if we really want to tackle these huge problems that we're dealing with, because it's not only climate change, it's much more, then we have to look at cooperation, which is much more where everybody works on the same subject and say, actually, we will do what is needed to solve that problem. Instead of looking at the problem and saying, what is my part of it? What, as a government, we could say, oh, this is not our responsibility. Well, actually, tackling the problem, it is to say, this is our joint responsibility, this is our joint problem, and everybody adds to what they can do instead of everybody looks at what's my profit in this solution. So I would really think, like, next to the fact that we need a lot of technical inventions, we also need innovative cooperation with the companies, with governments, but I think one part we completely forget, and that's actually the people living in our cities, because we treat them as consumers. So are they still happy with the products that we're bringing? But we have forgotten to treat people as citizens, people with a voice, people with ideas. So how do we include the citizens of Amsterdam or the citizens of cities really in the solutions, and not being as just participants in some kind of meeting, but actually asking them for a solution? Because I do truly believe that if they are part of the solution as citizens, not as consumers, then there will also be less resistance. And we started that in Amsterdam a year ago with a citizens' convention, people who were just, chosen by drawing lots. And they came together, 100 of them, worked for 6 weeks and came up with new solutions, how we can actually tackle this together. So I do believe that next to technical innovation, we also need to look at innovation in democracy and innovation in cooperation to really, face this huge task that we have.
I'd like to thank Arnaud, Marieke and Benoit. We've heard it loudly and clearly. The transition to a low-carbon future will not happen without our cities. It means innovative ideas, innovative collaborations, innovative finance. And what we've also heard is that making changes will not only make our cities greener, but they will make them more livable, more resilient, more enjoyable places to be. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoy the rest of the wonderful sessions here at ChangeNOW. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.